Hello and welcome to WJTS in.form. We have guests with us from SERS joining us to talk about some of the programs at SERS, specifically pediatric programs. Joining us in the studio is Patty Oser, and Patty is the Vice President of Community Services. What does that mean?
That means that I pretty much have to oversee all services that the agency delivers for children and adults.
So you're busy.
Yes.
Okay, and we also have with us Jayme Horton, and Jayme is a Pediatric Physical Therapist,
That's
which
right.
means you work with kids and help them to learn to do skills.
That's absolutely right.
Which is the topic of this edition of WJTS in.form. We're going to talk about, I guess, pediatric therapy services through SERS that are available.
That's right.
Okay. First of all, what are pediatric therapy services, or what sort of services are we talking about?
Sure. Bill, SERS provides therapy services to children, and the therapy services that we provide include physical therapy, which is what I am. So a physical therapist, and I'll just tell you what each discipline kind of works on. A physical therapist works on a child's gross motor skills. And when I say gross motor skills, I mean skills like crawling, sitting, walking, jumping, playing on a playground, riding a bike. So those kind of big motor skill movements. And then we have occupational therapists, and occupational therapists work on a child's what we call fine motor skills. And if the fine motor skills might include things like eating. So when we think about a way the child either picks up food or uses utensils. So those are some of the things that an occupational therapist works on. An occupational therapist also works on things like dressing, being able to manipulate their fasteners on their clothing, pulling their clothing up. And when we think about an occupational therapist, you know, they're really setting the stage for skills that they need later in school, like handwriting. So that's all of our therapies are very important, and they're looking at things that a child is going to be doing later in their life as well. Now, kind of moving on, we also have speech therapists, and speech therapists are working on a child's speech. And lots of times when we think about a child's speech, we think about what they're putting out, what they're saying to us. But a speech therapist works on not only what a child is saying, but also what a child is understanding. So their receptive communication. When you tell them something, do they understand what you're telling them? And then can they react to that?
And when we talk about children, what age are we talking about?
Sure. When we think about early intervention services in terms of first steps in Indiana, that's ages birth to 3 years. So when we're working with a child until their 3rd birthday, and then they transition to the school system and go to the preschool.
Okay. And when we're talking about, you mentioned First Steps. That's a program within SERS.
Right.
Okay. Can you explain what First Steps is?
Sure.
First Steps
Patty?
is actually a state program,
Okay.
a statewide program. It is the program funded through funding from the state and from the federal government. And it's pretty similar in most places in the state, operated as a whole in the state.
Okay. Now, off camera, you had mentioned that we're very fortunate to be in Indiana because there's some great funding in Indiana.
Right. Indiana is one of the fewer programs that sets their eligibility criteria fairly high. They allow more children into the program than most other states do. So we're fortunate in that regard. And for the most part, the service is a free service.
Okay.
Occasionally, a copay could come into play, but that's really on a pretty limited basis.
That was going to be one of my questions. Is there a fee that you need to pay to have SERS help you with your children? But that's awesome that there's not.
Yeah, occasionally, but it affects very, very few families.
Okay. Now, how do you know your child has a problem? Because kids grow at different stages, and different
Right.
kids grow in different ways.
Right, that's a great question, Bill. That, so many times when we have a child, particularly our first child, we have nothing to compare our child to, so we really don't know if our child is appropriate or if there is a delay going on. And kind of an aside, also, Bill, many times we think of a child who has something like Down syndrome or an identified genetic disability. We know that child is going to have a delay. But there are so many kids on our caseload that are otherwise typically developing children that may have a delay in a particular area or a couple of areas. So, we think about not only those children with an identified disability, but just an otherwise normal child would qualify for this service. So that was a good question.
Okay.
But back to your original question, I forgot your original question. I'm so sorry.
How would somebody know that they have a problem?
Sure,
How do you
right,
recognize?
right.
And I know there's a million different issues or
Right.
concerns the parents should have, but what are maybe some examples?
Right. Well, let's talk about that. How do you know if your child has a delay in an area? You know, in that first year of life, our kids are going to the doctor so frequently for their well baby checks. So really having a good conversation with your physician about what your child is doing or isn't doing is so important. And you know, I think when we go into our well baby visits with our physician gets a small glimpse of what's going on in that child's life. And if they're like my kids were, they clam up in front of the doctor and may show more than they're able to do on a typical basis, or may show nothing. And so that physician may not have a real clear picture just by looking at the child, what they're doing. So it's so important for us as parents to say, my child is doing this, this, and this, and they're not doing X, Y, or Z. So that is a great first step, to talk to your physician. Now, if a parent has concerns between those physician visits, or if they have concerns that they think, gosh, I just really don't know if my child is appropriate or not, that's a great time to call the First Steps office. And when they call the First Steps office, they'll first talk to somebody and they'll screen their child and say, okay, is your child doing this, this, and this? And then they also will get an evaluation. And that evaluation team will come to their home and do the evaluation on the child. And that's all at no charge to the family.
Okay, now they just make a phone call?
That's right.
What's the easiest way to reach? What is the phone number?
The local number is 367-1581.
Okay, and they can simply just call and ask questions.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Do you find that pride gets in the way sometimes of people calling? Or is it maybe more
pride.
misinformation?
It's probably lack of knowledge.
Okay.
Is probably one of the reasons people don't call. Or it's just trying to come to grips with, is there really something that I need to be concerned about or not? And that's a hard step for a lot of parents to come to, is deciding whether they really do need to pick up the phone and make that call. Because we obviously, all of us want our children to be perfect, you know, and not have extra needs. So.
Well, and I think sometimes too, other people are pretty good about giving their opinion.
Sure.
About, you know, oh, well, if the baby's a year old, they should be walking by now.
Right.
Well, not necessarily, because I guess kids are different.
Right, that's right.
What-
There is a window
yeah.
of when it's appropriate for a child to reach each milestone. I think that's a great time to talk, Bill, about kind of the importance behind early intervention and the importance of us going in and helping the child to learn some of these skills. There is so much cognitive development that happens between the age of birth and 5, and in particular between the ages of birth and 2 years. A child's cognitive development is contingent on how much they're able to explore their environment. So if we have a child who is not able to move to explore their environment, or doesn't like the feel of certain things, and they're going to self-limit and they won't explore their environment as much, thereby impacting their cognitive development. And so then we are setting the stage what's going to happen to them later as they get into their educational years. So that's why early intervention is so important for children.
I think I've heard somewhere that between age 0 and 5, that's when really you do almost all of your learning, and everything after 5 years old is just complementary to what you know.
Right.
As Jamie's pointed out, you know, we do help these children. What we do during this period of time sets them up for the skills that they're going to have later in life. But, you know, the thing that some parents need to understand is sometimes the delay is mild, and we can work with children, and sometimes we've released children before their 3rd birthday. You know, they've reached normal development. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of extra work in the beginning to get them on track. And if parents would just understand, if I just make the call, you know, I can find out, and perhaps we can do a year or so of therapy and they can be back on track.
Right, that's a great point, Patty, that there are many kids on my caseload who I only see for 6 months to catch them up. Kids who have only a delay with walking, who just, everything else is great. They're talking and they love to eat and they're doing very well with everything else. They just aren't walking. And so I can come in and work with the family and work with the child for just a short period of time and catch that kiddo right up to where they were, making the whole family's life a little bit nicer.
Well, maybe my question too might be, are you working with the child or working with the parents, teaching them how to help the child?
Right, that's a great question, Bill.
Exactly.
Yeah, we are. We're working with both of them really intimately. We're working with the child, so we do lots of one-on-one with the child. In fact, our whole therapy session is really one-on-one with the child, but the parents are always there. The parents are there, or their primary care provider. So if mom and dad work, we go to daycare and we work with the daycare providers. So, and the beauty of that is the daycare providers with that child so many hours a day, and they're learning the skills to be able to implement with the child the rest of the week. Because let's face it, you know, an hour of therapy isn't going to do a child any good a week, but with that parent and that daycare providers follow through of those suggested activities, that's going to get the kiddo where they need to go.
Okay, and so really, I guess the first step is to make the phone call and to make a contact.
Yeah.
Can that be anonymous if they want, just to call and say, hey, I just got a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Because that may be something people would like to do, is just to call and say, I don't know where I'm at, and can I just ask a few questions?
Right, absolutely.
They can do that, and they can request literature. There's a lot of literature that the local office has that they can send, checklists and things like that they can look at and kind of see what's my child doing in regards to this, when should they be able to do this. So there's a lot of help out there.
And SIRS is also out in the community a lot,
Yes.
where you can sit down and talk with people as well.
Yes.
Right.
Is there anything you ladies would like to add?
Just that encourage parents to call and check out the services if they feel that their child might need them. That's all.
You know, Bill, we talked a little bit about where we provide the therapy services, and as a working parent, our schedule is very busy. We are, and to think, how am I going to add a therapy in? That can be a daunting task, and it might even gear me toward, I don't know if I want to do this right now. I think I might want to wait and see. But the nice thing about early intervention or about the first step system is that we go to you. You don't come to the clinic as a parent and a child. We go to you in your natural environment. So whether that's home or daycare or Walmart or the playground, wherever it is appropriate for that child to be able to learn something, that's where we go. Now, on those parents who are working, we go to daycare and we work with the daycare providers, but at least once a month we meet in person with the parents to make sure they are kept abreast of what we're working on and what they can do in their time. And if parents want to do more than once a month, absolutely we absolutely will gear toward what fits their schedule and what their preferences are. But at least once a month, we are talking with them in person and showing them what we're doing.
Right, that's what I was wondering. Is therapy once a day, once a week, or does that vary?
Right. It varies depending on what the child's needs are. So the child gets evaluated by an evaluation team, and the evaluation team will determine, well, this child has a delay in this area, this area, and this area. So then they get therapists for those particular areas. And we can see a child anywhere from once a week for about an hour to once a month on a consultative kind of basis. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit, Bill, about the different therapies that First Steps entails, and we talked about PT, OT, and speech, and what they each work on. And there was one other therapy that is integral to a child's development, and that's a developmental therapist. And a developmental therapist works on a child, they work sort of on everything as far as what the other disciplines work on. They're just not highly specialized in any one of those particular areas. So they kind of are a global therapist. But one nuance that a developmental therapist works on that they kind of highlight are those cognitive skills. So those pre-academic skills, like they're learning their colors or their alphabet or their numbers, and working with a child on those skills. So that's one other really big area that the First Step system provides.
Well, it's very tough to be a parent. And it's very tough to know where your kids should be at certain points. And if you are concerned, simply call SIRS. It's the easiest thing to do.
Well, the number they should call is the First Steps office.
Okay.
That will give them the easiest access, and that is 367-1581. It is the local system point of entry for the First Step system.
Okay, thank you very much. We have had with us Patty Oser, who is the Vice President of Community Services for SIRS, and also a Pediatric Physical Therapist, and that is Jayme Horton with SIRS. Thank you for watching WJTS in.form. We are local people watching local people.